Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. You are about to hear
of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Today we're talking to Luke Larson and TJump. You can find TJump's content on the YouTube channel TJump. That'll all be included in today's show notes, that link. Luke, good to have you back, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Robert.
Tom, how you doing today, brother?
I'm all right. How are you guys?
Awesome. So today's topic is on morality. I'm guessing, Luke, as a Christian, you believe we get our morals from God. Would I be right there?
Yeah.
All right. And I believe in objective morality myself, but I don't know that would be Tom's position. Are you kind of more of like a moral relativist?
No, I'm a moral realist like most philosophers. So most philosophers are atheists, but they also believe in objective morality without a God. So it's pretty common position that you don't need a God for objective morality.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because that's kind of how I look at it. I think when you and I see, we seem to be on the same page, but when we say objective morality, that's probably confusing to Luke, I'm guessing, because when he says objective morality, I think what he means is morality from God, whereas we're meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong here, don't let me put words in your mouth, but we're meaning objective as in outside of humanity. No matter what time in history you're at, it's either good or bad for human flourishing. Something similar to that, correct?
Yeah, something like that. It'd just be true, independent of opinion. That's just what objective means. So yeah.
Yeah, even
and you can base it on flourishing if you want. I usually go off of freedom and well-being, or not well-being, freedom as opposed to well-being. So I usually go with that instead of flourishing.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, Tom, I gotta say, I've been listening to a lot of your videos, and you've got a very well constructed little ethical theory there.
Thanks.
No problem.
But you don't agree, right, Luke? I mean, you...
I don't. First of all, even if his theory did work out as a normative way or revisionist, I still hold that morality comes from God. But even if that weren't true, even if God doesn't exist, I just don't see how there can be any objective morality. Even looking at Tom's, I just see several problems within it.
Like what?
Well, first off, it kind of seems subjective what he's chosen. He hasn't proved why that is good or why it would be bad to do. He terms it an involuntary imposition of will. There's no reason for that to be bad. But other than that, even if we just gave him that claim, his moral theory, his ethical theory, leads to things that no one would say, like a rock hitting you in the head and killing you is immoral, or the passing of time is immoral. It's just very contrarian.
Okay, so those aren't actually problems.
Well, no, the problem in itself is that you've given no reason for that to be good or bad. You've just subjectively chosen it.
Well, no, that's false. I mean, the entire premise of my model is that the conclusion is based on the evidence of moral intuition and moral progress. And if you plot the moral intuition and moral progress, you can describe that pattern with this principle. So literally, it is entirely based on a reason and not at all subjective.
Well, no, it's in the way that we're using objective that is not dependent on a mind for existence. Your theory of moral progress, first of all, that is no evidence of there being objective morals. For an error theorist or anything like that, or someone who just thinks there's been a regress, I mean, that statement would be false. And then on top of that, for moral intuition, you could just say those are internal forces, your biology bringing that about. There's no reason to say that's actually outside of humanity.
Okay, so none of that, what you said, actually works. So again, my model is the evidence that we're using to create a model, the hypothesis, is the fact that we see moral intuition and moral progress. We see these things and we try to describe them we try to use principles to describe what those things instantiate, and then we use that to come up with a hypothesis. Here are the principles that I think this instantiates, and that's where my model gets the idea of the involuntary imposition of will. And then from that, we can say, if my hypothesis is true, then we can make testable predictions. We can say, in the future, our moral intuitions will develop and we'll see rocks as falling on people as immoral. That's a future testable prediction. And if that is correct, that would be evidence that my hypothesis is correct. So Is there any proof now? Obviously not. I haven't been able to do any scientific tests, but that isn't relevant at all. Is there evidence to support it? Yes, it does fit the evidence to support it like any scientific hypothesis. So nothing you said really maps onto how hypotheses work in science at all.
Okay, so when you're talking about your mapping, how it's been occurring in humanity and the trend, first of all, the thing you're mapping, I don't think is morality, because I've listened to your debates, and where it ends off going is you redefine morality as just as it being good to have free will. Like, I can't say it's
No.
You define good as the supporting of someone's goals. You define it as that.
No. Again, so we're looking at moral intuition and moral progress. The thing that everyone agrees on is morality in the field of philosophy. These are the things that instantiate morality. And then we plot those things out on a graph and say, well, what are the principles that can describe this pattern? And now I have come up with a principle that I think describes the pattern. It's not, that's just how evidence and hypotheses work. I haven't redefined anything. I've just come up with a principle that describes the pattern. So I'm literally describing the phenomenon we call morality using this principle.
You didn't really come up with it. That's just you use the liberty oppression, basically.
No, I do not. This mine is not in any way like that at all. So incorrect.
Can you just lay it out for us? Just your whole premise, Tom, on objective morality? And then
I believe objective morality exists. And if we look at moral intuition and moral progress and we plot them out as to try and describe a pattern of what we see as the phenomenon of morality and create a principle to describe that pattern, the principle I think that we can come to is that any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And that is essentially the grounds of my model.
What about my daughter runs out into the street, there's a car coming, and I exert my will over her will because she's unaware of the consequences of her behavior. I grab her by the arm and pull her away from the car. Is that...
Yeah, that would be immoral, but it would be a justified immoral action because you're doing one thing, you're imposing on her will to prevent a greater imposition on her will, which would be the car running over her. So it would be immoral to do that in the best of all possible worlds, because in the best of all possible worlds, you wouldn't need to. You could just snap your fingers and make her go non-physical or something and do something that doesn't impose on her will. So the fact that there is a less immoral action you could do if you were all powerful proves that the fact that you're stopping her using physical force is not the most moral thing you could do and therefore isn't the moral action. So that's the way you can assess whether or not an action is moral or not. You can say, well, is there a more moral option if I was all powerful? And if there is, then the action you're doing isn't actually the moral one. It's just the least immoral action you can do given your limitations.
That makes sense to me. And kind of a utilitarian philosophy, I'm guessing something similar to that.
Well, similar in some respects, yes, but not in the others, because in utilitarianism, the moral thing to do is whatever your limitations are. So if you have a choice between killing 1 and killing 5, the moral thing to do is to kill the 5. Whereas in my model, I say, no, it's still immoral to kill the 1, or kill the 1, not the 5.
Right.
So it's still immoral to kill the 1 in my model. Whereas in utilitarianism, it is the moral thing to do to kill the 1. And so I think that's a downside to utilitarianism, where you can do something horribly immoral, like kill someone, but it still counts as the moral thing. So I think my model is actually superior to utilitarianism in that respect, that it still recognizes that what you're doing isn't moral just because it's the best you can do in the limitations. It's just the justified immoral action.
Okay. I like this model because it leaves off all that, like, let's try to look at morality from like this purity sense. Like sometimes doing something that's not necessarily perfect and good is still the way to go because it's maybe pragmatic in that moment. So I can work with this, but I think Luke would agree if not for being a Christian, because it seems very practical to me. But Luke, you were wanting to lay out, if I recall, what you believe morality is, and specifically what you believe objective morality is, and that might help the listener a little bit. Yeah,
and I think that's good because Tom's theory does make it very clear on certain things, but I still don't believe it to be objective in the sense of the definition we're using. So I'll make my case first and then show how I don't think this is objective. So basically, my case is that if God were to exist, we have a sound foundation for the objective moral values and duties. The values coming from God's character. So it's not because he commanded them that they're moral or a value. It's just because that is who he is. And then the duties just give us his command gives us the duties and our obligations. But I want to focus because I think that's fairly evident use for all theists, and I think you guys would agree if God were to be true. But on the idea that let's assume you're right and God isn't real and he doesn't exist, I still don't see how yours is objectively right, even if it were to show differences in quote unquote moral and quote immoral things. Let's say because you're just mapping what humanity has shown that they think morality is. You say it's basically the free will and to not impede it. But let's say we were to go back and just start over, just restart humanity. People with a very different set of moral values might well have evolved. I mean, Darwin wrote in his Descent of Man, quote, "If men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering." For us to think that human beings are special and our morality is objectively true is to succumb to the temptation of speciesism. That is an unjustified bias in favor of our own species. Like, I don't see why you chose that. You might be basing it off what humans have shown, but if humans weren't there, how would those morals still be there?
Because of moral progress. So I don't really care about Darwin's opinion. Giving quotes of other people isn't really relevant to anything. So, moral progress shows that as long as the resources increase, then all species essentially, with the intellectual capability, will start to value every conscious being essentially, or start to grow the level of value of things that are seen as not as societally as important. So, if the bee colonies developed a high enough level of intelligence and had the spare resources to keep their brothers alive, then they would see it as immoral to kill them. That's just how moral progress would work. It always expand the level of morality if your resources expand and your intelligence expand in every species, everywhere, no matter what. That is essentially the premise. That's why it's objective, and it's objective in the same sense fitness is objective. So fitness is objective. The fact that there are different species that can survive in more environments than other species is just an objective fact of reality. Similarly, morality can be objective in the fact that in every species, everywhere in the universe, as they gain higher levels of intelligence and higher levels of resources, they will always start to value morally. The scope of morality will increase to other conscious agents once they have the ability to do so. And that's the objective claim. So moral progress would be true independent of species, independent of human development. And so the Darwin quote just doesn't apply at all.
When you define good, you're talking about like it basically furthers your species or it furthers your will but just define good for me. Just the term good.
Lack of involuntary impositions of will.
Okay. So if you can't say...
Well, I mean, let's go back a little bit. So objective just means true independent of opinion. So it doesn't matter. I could define good as a square or circle, and if that is true independent of opinion, it's objective. So if it's describing some feature of reality, it's objective. It doesn't matter how you define it. So if there is this quality of the fact that involuntary imposition of will and gathering resources and intelligence moves us towards pursuing that end inherently, then it's objective, whether you want it to be or not, just as like any law of nature, essentially. But the God-based morality doesn't work. It just objectively fails, which is the consensus in philosophy. It does not work as an objective basis of morality at all. So mine obviously does, because it's just a principle, and if the principle corresponds to reality, then it's objective by definition. It's pretty simple. But the God-based morality doesn't work because it makes morality subjective. It's contingent on a mind.
Wait, how does it make it subjective? I don't think God is a contingent being. Nothing created him.
It doesn't matter if it's contingent or not. The morality is contingent on a mind. If the mind isn't contingent, it makes no difference.
But it does make a difference. Because if God were to exist in one world, he exists in all worlds. So it's objectively true that these things would be right or wrong.
No, it doesn't matter how many worlds he exists in or doesn't exist in. If morality is contingent on a mind, it is by definition subjective. The qualities of the mind make no difference.
Oh, okay. I think we differ on this one. Because if the mind never changes or it doesn't...
The changing doesn't matter. Again, the definition of objective is independent of mind, independent of opinion. So whether or not the mind changes doesn't matter. Whether or not the mind is necessary doesn't matter. Whether or not the mind is in all universes doesn't matter. If it's contingent on a mind, it is by definition subjective. There's no part of the definition of subjective and objective does it say a mind can change or a mind is not a contingent mind. No part of that is anywhere in the definition of subjective or objective.
Yeah, but the point of objective, so it's not dependent on mind, is to say that it doesn't change, that there is nothing in the universe that could make it move. No. Independent of an opinion. I don't think it's not God's opinion, it's his character. So you can say it like that. It's not based on his mind, it's just based on his being.
Again, that doesn't make any difference. Subjective is contingent on a mind. Doesn't say anything about changing or not. That's not relevant. Like, for example, at 5 seconds ago, I was thinking of chocolate ice cream. Like, that is an objective fact, even though it's contingent on a mind. So it's objective because it's true independent at one particular time, and it'll change from second to second. But the whether or not it's going to change or not doesn't make a difference. It's still a subjective opinion from my mind because it was contingent on my mind, even though it's never going to change. So even though that one fact of that one moment in time will never, ever be different, it's still a subjective fact because it was contingent on a mind.
But now you're basing it off of that, like, you're basing it off the fact that you think God thinks of chocolate at one point and then a strawberry at another.
No, that's irrelevant. So it doesn't make a difference at all whether or not it's true at all time, true at one time, whether the mind changes or doesn't change. The only thing that matters is if it's a part of a mind, it's by definition subjective.
But no one uses, but when we talk about morality in a way of subjective, we're referring to that it changes. It can change from culture to culture, or it can change from time period to time.
No, it's contingent on a mind. That's what subjective means. Not contingent on a mind means objective. Contingent on a mind means subjective. The changing part isn't relevant. Like, it can change and still be objective. Like, for example, there could be a law of gravity. We know that gravity changed from the early universe to the later universe. It's still objective. It's still true, independent of human minds. So it's not the fact that it's changing that matters to it. That's a different aspect of morality. It's the fact that it's contingent on a mind. That's what makes it subjective.
But if we not redefine the word objective. Okay, let's say it's contingent on a mind. Let's say it's God's, not mind, but what he's thinking of, but just a characteristic. And since he created the world, I believe God to be everywhere, omnipresent and omnitemporal. So he's everywhere at all times. So his character of good being there, that's what I base good off of. So it's not just the fact that it's not changing. It's not even just the mind. This is just a fact of reality, if you believe in the Christian God in this sense.
Well, that didn't make much sense. So is something good because God says it's good, or did God say it's good because it's good for some independent reason?
It's okay. So we have duty because God told us it was good. That's a command.
Okay, wait. Could you answer the question?
He said it,
could you answer the question?
It is neither of those. That's a false dichotomy. It's nothing to do with what he said. It's what he is. You're saying your objective morality is just a basic fact.
So wait. Go back for a second. So either it's good because he said it's good, or it's good for some other reason than he said it's good. That's P or not P. It is a true dichotomy. There is no third option.
It's good for a different reason than he said it's good. For the value, not for the duty, but for the value.
Okay, so it's good because there's some part of his nature, and he's just saying that part of his nature is what's good.
Well, you can't say some part of his nature. His whole nature is what omnibenevolent.
No, obviously that can't be the case. So because his consciousness, if it was his consciousness, then if that would be the feature that he's like, it would be him saying it's good because of it's his consciousness. So it has to be something other than his consciousness, like in his nature, that makes it good. Yeah.
So his nature, what make because I believe the universe, or all multiple universes, or whatever your view is within God. So behind it all, it's his nature is what is good, not anything he said with his conscience or anything like that.
Right. So it's not his consciousness. It's not what he said. It's his nature that is good, and his consciousness is just saying this part of my nature is what goodness is. It's his consciousness
putting out what his nature is to us, which gives us the duty of following it.
So duties don't come from commands, first of all. Secondly, if that is the case, then I can just say morality. Wait. There's 2 points here. So first thing is that obligations and duties don't come from commands ever. It's impossible, logically impossible. But secondly, if morality comes from God's nature, then you can just say that morality can be grounded in anything's nature. The nature is nature, some naturalistic pantheism, an undiscovered law of nature, anything like that. You don't need a consciousness at that point at all.
Well, no, because at that point, I'm saying God has always existed, Well,
that doesn't the amount of existing doesn't matter.
You can't base it off a contingent being.
Contingency
you can't base
doesn't matter.
It off being. Yeah, it does.
No.
The idea of objectivity, that it's always been there and will always be that.
That's not what
objectivity
objectivity
means.
means.
It just came about
when I was born. You said 10 things that are all wrong. So first, objectivity does not mean it's always been there. It means true independent of a human mind. If I said there was a Platonic object of morality, which is a pretty well understood concept of morality in philosophy, and a God just created it 5 seconds ago, there could have been no objective morality, and then now there is an objective morality because now there is this
you can't create. The point is that you don't create Platonic objects. You
No,
can't.
that's incorrect. You can. That's totally logically possible. There is no logical contradiction there at all. It is possible to have a universe with no objective morality and then have a moral object be created that is the instantiation of objective morality. So you can have objective morality that is contingent. There's not a problem with that at all. Not an issue. Again, objective just means independent of mind.
But okay, so a person's character, so you're basing it off a moral agent. Morality, it
No.
has to be a person.
No.
You just said something
objects,
created.
Platonic objects are not persons.
How can a non-person have a value?
Values are
How
descriptions.
can it be moral?
Values are descriptions that correspond to the object. Values aren't the actual morality. So morality is the principles that describe right and wrong. But that's not what makes something right and wrong. What makes something right and wrong is what Plato would call the good. It is like an ontology of goodness, which could be like a Platonic object, which is what Plato used. And so values and morality are the principles that describe that thing, whatever it is. But you don't need values or principles in that thing.
How can it be some like abstraction? Like how can what Plato said? I understand what he called the
Platonic
good.
object is a thing. It's an ontology. It's not an abstraction. It is a physical thing.
I thought not everyone believes in a Platonic object. I don't even think you said.
I'm not saying everyone does. I'm just giving this as an example. Here's a common example in philosophy of an objective morality, whereas there is a Platonic object, which is an instantiation of morality. It's not a person. It's not conscious. It's just like a Platonic object, which is kind of like it's non-physical, so it's abstract in that sense, but it actually exists. So there is this object that instantiates objective morality, and it is the good, as Plato defined it. And so I'm just giving it as an example. It's not. I'm not saying everyone
then
agrees.
go into that. Put some weight behind it. Why can a random object, like a Platonic object, be considered the good? How can a non-person be a moral agent? Like with your idea of the rock, you say the rock can do something immoral. How can it do that?
Moral agents are not required for the good. Moral agents are just the descriptions of people who correspond to morality. So you do not need a moral agent for morality at all. Like, why do you even ask that question? It's weird.
Well, a person, you need a person.
No, you don't. Why do you think you need a person?
So for example, if you've said previously in other videos that a rock can do something immoral.
Well, no, so that's separate. That's my personal morality isn't part of this part I'm bringing up. So Platonic morality is something well understood in philosophy. It has nothing to do with my personal rock conclusion. So you do not need to ground objective morality in a person at all. That's not a thing in philosophy.
Luke, before you jump in, let me ask about the rock thing, because I'm kind of confused. I would find it hard to believe, just from what I've heard from Tom thus far, that he would say a rock can be immoral. Am I reading you right here, Tom?
Well, right. I would phrase it more precisely. I'd say that certain environments would be more or less moral than other environments. My prediction, based on the evidence of morality, is that in the future, the way we are understanding what morality is, specifically from developments in neuroscience, when we say a person is moral or a person is immoral, all we're saying is that their brain state is a physical order that is more or less likely to hurt or help other brain states, other different brains. And so we're not saying there is any culpability behind the person. There is no free will there. They're all just determined physical interactions. And the morality is really just a physical thing that is imposing involuntary impositions of will on other brains. So that would mean that if we expand that principle that it's just a physical thing, like a domino falling, the same thing could be applied to a rock. If a rock imposes on someone without their will, that would also be seen as immoral. And so in the future, as we progress technologically and expand our level of resources to the point where there is essentially no more involuntary, there's no more people hurting other people for any reason, the only things we will see as moral or immoral will be natural impositions on our will, like tornadoes, hurricanes, black holes, rocks, and those things. And we will see those things as immoral in the future because that environment is more immoral in the way that it hurts people than other environments that will allow people to thrive better. So, but that's a prediction about the future, not today. Okay.
But in that case, wouldn't we conclude that in the future, the concept of morality would be antiquated, more or less, instead of us using some, old term? Like, it would be like us calling it evil today. Right. Our concept of morality is going to evolve and change, just like our concepts of everything evolve and change. And so pretty much every usage of language we have today is going to be antiquated 500 years in the future. Like, for example, in science, we called the atom
The atom is just the Greek or Latin for the smallest constituent part.
Hmm.
But the thing we called atom, which we actually discovered is made of other smaller constituent parts, which are made of other smaller constituent parts. But we still call it an atom, even though it's not the smallest constituent part. Same with universe. We call it universe. The Latin's the everything is meant for literally everything that exists. But now we discovered the universe had a beginning and there's stuff before it. And so, but we still call it the universe, even though it's an antiquated term. So all terminologies become antiquated in the way we thought about them as we gain new knowledge and we have a more accurate understanding of what the concept really is. And that's going to be the same is true of morality with anything. It's like our concept of it now is not 100% accurate for sure. Like none of our concepts right now are 100% accurate.
Well said. I'm following you 100%. Luke, once again, man, I feel like we're coming right back to where we were earlier, where this all sounds completely reasonable and rational if you're not a Christian. You know what I mean? It's like this belief is what's preventing you. And this is my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like this belief of yours is preventing you from being able to see this clearly.
Well, let me give a reason, because right now he's basing it off of that there can be Platonic objects, because that's really where the foundation.
Wait, no, that my model is not about Platonic objects.
Yeah, no, yours doesn't use it, but this is a basis for objective morality. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a hypothetical counterexample, but it's not the basis of.
So
I don't think Platonic objects actually exist. I just want to clarify that. I don't think they actually exist.
So wait, no, then what would be the basis for your objective morality if that doesn't exist?
A physical phenomenon, an epiphenomenon, kind of like fitness. It's like there's a thing in the universe that, like fitness is a thing in the universe where there are certain species that can survive in more environments, and there is a hypothetical epitome of fitness where there's an animal who could survive in all possible environments. So there is this property that exists in the universe. Similarly, there is a property in the universe that describes interactions between minds and the environment and how they can survive in it. And that interactive property is what I call morality, or what morality is, or what we should call morality. So
morality, like in that sense, and just forgive me if I'm wrong, because, but are you saying that in that sense, morality, not like fitness, is dependent on these minds, how they relate? That like it's about how they relate. So these.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there were no minds, there would be no morality.
No, you could still have morality as being this relation, even if there are no minds. Like, for example, I could say a flock of geese is a certain number of geese in the air. Even if there are no geese in the universe, that's still what a flock of geese is. So you don't actually need the brains to exist to have the objective property that is still there. It's just a thing. You don't actually need of it. This wouldn't.
At that point, so the idea of things being right and wrong could be there, but there just is no right and wrong.
No. So
you've just said, so the flock of geese isn't actually there, but it could be there. Like we'd still call it this, but there's nothing actually. Like, I don't think
the relation between the geese exists regardless of whether or not there is any geese. So you could say or make a simpler example, an apple is a fruit that comes from apple trees. Like even if there are no apple trees in the universe ever at this point in time, the definition of apple stays the same. And so there would still be apples if this thing existed. So there is an objective quality, an objective property of what an apple is, even if there are no apples. You don't need the apple to exist for there to be an objective definition of an apple, or a planet, or a star, or any of those kinds of things. Those things, the definition of what those is the same regardless of whether or not they actually exist in the universe.
So the morality you're talking about, so let's say there were humans, and this morality was being shaped and formed. So it's being shaped by the interactions between human and human?
No, we are discovering it. It's not being shaped.
You're discovering it.
Yeah, moral intuition and moral progress are the things that we interact with to discover this property. It's not what creates the property.
And why do you think, so moral intuition, I do think that's a point of saying there is objective morals, but why does that point towards, like, how is that a case for an atheist point of view?
Moral intuition isn't evidence of objective morality. Moral intuition is just a phenomenon we experience. We experience moral sensations. That's all it means. It's like if we see an object, it's just we see it. That doesn't mean it's actually there. It could be a delusion. It could be an illusion, a hallucination, whatever. But we have this phenomenon we experience of we see it. So moral intuition is the fact that we feel this moral thing there. And we have to come up with hypotheses to explain this feeling. Now, it could be it's subjective, product of evolution, complete delusion, evil demon, whatever. My hypothesis to explain this is that it's an objective feature. So the moral intuition isn't evidence of anything. It's just a phenomenon we're trying to
It's
create
pointing to,
explanations
yeah,
for.
yeah. It's showing something. So, but what now that it's pointing to something, and you say, okay, that something is an objective something. Like it's not just pointing to our evolutionary, like it's byproduct of evolution, but you're saying it's actually pointing to something that's there.
Yep.
What does it point like in your set? Because it's not pointing to a platonic object, according to you. What
Yep.
is it?
Yep. It's pointing to a higher order epiphenomenal process like fitness.
You think there's something other than just the material world? There's something there that's
No.
gives it weight?
No, fitness is just a material interaction. It's a relation between living physical objects and the physical environment. And the epiphenomenal of morality is, again, just a physical relation between physical brains and their physical environment. So it's just physical stuff.
Okay. But yeah, so without physical brains, it has no weight or anything like that with morality. But okay,
I don't
so
know what
now
that means.
talking about morality, I don't understand how you brought this. Like, so your involuntary of imposition of will is being immoral, but that doesn't cover a lot of things that normal people would consider immoral. Like, it doesn't cover hate speech. It doesn't.
Hate speech isn't immoral.
What?
Hate speech isn't immoral. Words aren't immoral.
So what you don't define, like, you wouldn't say it's what a human is doing to another human. Like, I am trying to spread hate. Like, I'm expressing hate for this person. You don't think like me trying to hurt them is bad?
Expressing opinions is not immoral, no. Like if you were trying to physically restrict them or directly or indirectly to involuntarily impose on their will would be the greatest way, or cause them
no,
harm.
but I want them to feel pain. Like, I want them to feel pain.
Okay.
I'm doing it for that express
No.
purpose. Is that wrong?
No, it's not immoral.
Robert, what do you think about that? Would you consider that
I kind
wrong?
of wanted to follow up on that, actually. Would it be fair to say that I could impose my will on you verbally? Let's say if I'm your slave owner, or I'm your boss, or the parent-child analogy might fit well here. Is like, there's not a lot I could say to Luke or Tom right now that's going to hurt their feelings. Not a lot. I could try really hard. I got some good your mama jokes, but you're probably just invulnerable to that altogether. But if we had a certain relationship, that might change. If we were gay partners, right? Or if we were in some kind of employment situation, or if I was a judge and you were on trial, I could then use my words to affect your freedom and your liberty in that sense. So at least in that way, would you agree, Tom, that maybe Luke's onto something?
Well, no, because it's never the words. Like, it's never the words that do it. Like, the judge says, you're going to prison. Like, those words don't do anything. What is when the cops grab you and put cuffs on you, that's the immoral part. The words are just a command.
Why is that immoral? But like on a normal view, we don't consider someone being like taken to prison as immoral. Like, it sucks that they made those choices, but we don't say, oh, it's a bad thing that we're stopping them from hurting other people.
Well, actually, that is the consensus in neurology, that people who are criminals are victims of their biology, essentially. And so putting them in prison because they're like culpable or they deserve punishment is just morally wrong. We should treat them as if they're victims of their biology, and we should try to cure them of that psychology that causes them to do those immoral actions. So it is the consensus in neurology and psychology that all criminals are just victims of their biology, their environment, and their upbringing, and that we should treat them as with respect and try to cure them. They aren't deserving of punishment. They're not horribly immoral for what they did. It's not good that we're putting them in prison. It's just the least immoral thing we can do because we don't have a way to cure them at this time.
Wait, so I have a question. Does that mean, like, do they have no choice in what they did? Like, were they determined to do that?
Yeah, there's no free will. Free will has essentially been debunked in every scientific field.
Okay, but then how are there? Okay, I think we must be talking about morals in a different. Like, let's see an eye to eye on that one, because I see morals. You have to have free will. You have to make the choice. Like, it's not wrong if someone murders another person if they had no choice to do it. Like, what's the point? There's no how is there going to be justice? Why would you be angry? Like,
well, justice, again, is immoral. It's not a real thing. It's not required for morality at all. It's not like something is moral because you got just desserts for it. Like, the consequences of the action don't make an action moral or immoral.
No,
so
but people feel like they should deserve justice, right?
People I don't care. Like, so justice doesn't matter to morality. Like, something isn't moral because of a punishment or a reward you get for it. For something to be objectively moral, it has to be moral or immoral, independent of the consequences, independent of the justice. So justice cannot have anything to do with morality, or else morality stops being objective in the unchanging sense that you mentioned earlier. So, but in neurology, like, again, free will is like just been debunked in every scientific field for the most part, and it's not a relevant thing. But this doesn't affect any philosophers of moral realists, because you don't need free will for morality. You just need, like, the compatibilist view that Dan Dennett takes is that what we define, or what he defines as free will, is just our neurological functioning without external impediment being able to do what it craves to do. So, for example, if you don't have a brain tumor or something, then we can call that free will and hold that person accountable because their brain state is such that it just desires to hurt people. As opposed to someone who does have a brain tumor, then we can cure them of the brain tumor. But as our technology grows and we can cure people of certain brain states, then we will see those equally as being like a brain tumor, and they're not culpable at all. And so the compatibilist view is just very much like mine, is that we only hold people culpable insofar as we don't have a technological way to treat them for the whatever condition they have that makes their brain state such that it would do criminal acts. And so that is the morally superior way to see the criminal justice system. And so, yes, police are not moral in what they do. It's not moral to put people in prison. It's just the least, like stopping your kid from running into the street. It's the least immoral thing we can do, a justified immoral action.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's just very, like, I don't think this is what the majority of people will hold. And I know that's not a case for saying, okay, that doesn't change whether it's objective or not. But you're trying to make you're graphing something. Are you not trying to graph at all? Are you taking this into consideration, what we believe right now to be right and wrong?
Yes. So you're right. This may not be what the majority of average Joes think, but is what the majority of the experts in the field think. And that's actually relevant evidence. Like, average Joes, the majority of average Joes is just a bandwagon fallacy. So it doesn't really matter what most average Joes think. But it does matter what most experts in the field think. And yes, I am incorporating these beliefs into my evidence for what objective morality is. If we look at moral progress, we see that there are certain beliefs that change. We have the belief that homosexuality is immoral. That used to be a common belief, but now it's gone. Now we flipped on that one, that homosexuality is now actually perfectly reasonable and not immoral at all. And there's many different examples like this, like women's rights, voting rights, animal rights, veganism, vegetarianism. The pattern there is that certain beliefs we have about morality are contingent beliefs based on our culture, that we need to do this one thing to promote the survivability of the culture. And as we grow technologically, that belief dies off. It's no longer relevant to morality. And so there are many certain beliefs that we have that are not relevant to objective morality. They're contingent beliefs based on our culture that we need to filter out of our context of what is objective morality. And to describe those, that we can define them by saying, if this belief is one that is required to promote the society, but it's an involuntary position of will that is to promote the society in a given context, but as we gain resources, it will no longer be necessary, and that belief is lost. That kind of belief can be filtered out of our consideration of objective morality. And that's this idea of police being moral is one of those beliefs. So it would fit into that category of beliefs that are contingent on our cultural situations that need to be filtered out of our consideration of objective morality.
So, Tom, if someone were to be walking down the street and they decided they wanted to kill themselves, but at the moment they had no opportunity to enact their will, would it be considered moral when someone who didn't know that this person wanted to die comes up to them and shoots them and then follows to steal all their belongings? Would you say that man was moral, the one who killed the other person?
No, not unless they absolutely knew and asked for consent. Would you like to die? And if so, I would be happy to help you. And then it would be moral to do that. And then they'd have to ask for consent to say, well, can I take your stuff afterward? And if consent was given, then it would be moral.
But why did they have to ask for consent? Like, that was aligned with that person's will.
Because they don't know. If you were in the best of all possible worlds, then you would know that and you wouldn't have to. But since we're not in the best of all possible worlds, we have limitations. So we can't just take actions and assume one way or the other. You have to ask for consent. That's why consent is required for things, because we don't know everything.
So I simply want to make the statement that my first contention, that if God were to exist, there would be objective morals. I don't think in the end you had anything that stuck against that. I think I answered your questions there. And on the second point, that if atheism were true, there wouldn't be a sound foundation for objective morals. I don't believe I was able to stick anything strongly onto you. I don't think you have any strong proof of it. That's all I have to say.
Guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. You can find a link to TJump's content in today's show notes. I really appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to Tom and Luke. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for the top 10 atheist podcast classification for the Right to Reason podcast. Find their link in today's show notes. Thank you to our patrons. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy and I will talk about the reasoning of left and right politics. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
We're up all night to get lucky. We're up all night to get lucky. We're up all night to get lucky. We're up all right to reason.
You have the right to reason.
You got the right to reason.
We're up all night to reason.
You have the right to reason.
I have the right to reason.